There are moments in a human life when everything you thought was stable begins to feel slightly misaligned, as if the world has not changed, but your perception of it has quietly shifted underneath your awareness. And in those moments, something deeper than thought begins to speak, not in words that come from outside of you, but in a presence that feels strangely familiar, as if it has always been there waiting for you to finally become still enough to notice it. If you are here reading this now, it is not random in the way you once believed randomness works. There are sequences in life that appear accidental only because the deeper structure behind them cannot be seen with ordinary attention. And yet, even without seeing it, you have felt it. You have felt it in the way certain days seem heavier without reason, and in the way certain quiet moments feel strangely meaningful, even when nothing is happening. You have felt it in the times when your mind slowed down just enough for something deeper to rise, only for you to distract yourself again because the feeling was too unfamiliar to hold for long. And still, it returns. Not loudly, not aggressively, but persistently, like something that refuses to forget you, even when you try to forget it. And what you have called confusion in your life may have been something else entirely, not absence of direction, but proximity to a truth that has not yet been fully understood in language. Because truth does not always arrive in clear sentences. Sometimes it arrives as tension. Sometimes it arrives as repetition. Sometimes it arrives as a quiet discomfort with the life you are living, even when, on paper, nothing seems wrong. There is a senrappersen roving through your experience, and it does not always match your expectations of how guidance should feel. You were taught that clarity would come as certainty, that direction would come as obvious instruction, that meaning would arrive fully formed and easy to hold. But what if the way you were taught to recognize truth was too small for what truth actually is? What if the presence you have been sensing is not something trying to add itself to your life, but something trying to reveal what was never truly separate from it? There is a voice that does not compete with noise. It does not raise itself above distraction. It waits beneath it. And when life becomes even slightly quieter, even for a moment, that voice becomes closer than your own thoughts. You have experienced it before, perhaps without naming it, in moments where you suddenly felt a shift in understanding without knowing why, in moments where something inside you softened without external reason, in moments where you felt seen, even though no one was there. And now, something in you is being asked not to believe, but to notice. Notice how often you have been guided away from things that would have consumed you more than you realized at the time. Notice how certain endings in your life, though painful, prevented something heavier from continuing. Notice how certain delays forced you into timing you did not understand then, but may be closer to understanding now. Not everything that interrupted your path was against you. Some interruptions were forms of protection you were not yet able to interpret. There is a pattern in your life that becomes visible only when you stop treating each moment as isolated. When you begin to see continuity instead of fragments, something shifts. You start to recognize that your experiences are not random points scattered across time, but part of a longer unfolding process that is still in motion. And in that unfolding, even your confusion has been working for you, not against you. Because confusion has a function when it is honest. It prevents premature closure. It stops you from believing explanations that are too small. It keeps you searching even when certainty feels tempting. And in that searching, something in you remains alive to deeper meaning. There are people who stop searching too early. They settle into explanations that reduce their experience instead of expanding it. But something in you has resisted that reduction. Even when you tried to accept simpler answers, something inside you did not fully agree. That resistance was not dysfunction. It was preservation. It was the part of you that refuses to let your life be defined too quickly. And now, as you stand in this moment of your life, there is a subtle invitation forming again. Not toward urgency, but toward awareness. Not toward pressure, but toward recognition. Because recognition changes everything without forcing anything. You are beginning to see that much of what you thought was failure was actually transition. That much of what you thought was delay was actually alignment forming in silence. That much of what you thought was emptiness was actually space being created for something you could not yet receive while holding on to what was not meant to continue. And this is where the human experience becomes difficult, because letting go is not just about external things. It is about internal identity structures that have held you together for a long time. Even identities formed through struggle can feel like safety when they are familiar. Even patterns that cause pain can feel secure when they are known. But something deeper in you is no longer satisfied with familiarity alone. It is asking for truth that is more alive than repetition. It is asking for a way of being that is not only survivable, but meaningful in a way that reaches beyond survival. And in that asking, something begins to reorganize within you. Not dramatically, not instantly, but quietly, like a shift in gravity that you only notice when you try to move in the old way and realize it no longer feels natural. You may have already experienced moments like this. Moments where old reactions feel slightly delayed, where familiar fears do not grip you as tightly as they once did, where certain emotional patterns begin but do not complete themselves the way they used to. These are not random improvements in mood. They are signs of internal restructuring. Something in you is learning a new language of response. And in that learning, you are not losing yourself. You are meeting yourself beyond reflex. There is a version of you that is not driven primarily by fear of loss or need for approval. A version that does not interpret uncertainty as danger. A version that does not collapse, meaning when outcomes are unclear. That version has always been closer than you thought, but it has been buried under layers of adaptation. And now, layer by layer, something is becoming less buried. This is why certain moments in your life feel heavier than others. Not because life is becoming worse, but because what no longer belongs to your deeper direction is becoming more visible as something that cannot remain in place. Awareness brings clarity, and clarity brings movement, and movement always creates temporary discomfort when old structures are still in place. But discomfort is not a sign of wrong direction. It is often a sign of contact between two states of being that cannot coexist indefinitely. And you are in that contact point now, between who you were taught to be and who you are becoming when you are no longer only shaped by that teaching. There is something very important to understand here. Something that cannot be rushed into belief but can be slowly recognized through reflection. Your life has never been separate from guidance. Even in your most uncertain periods, even in your most emotionally fragmented moments, something within the structure of your experience has been responding to a deeper coherence. Not everything you wanted was given immediately. Not everything you expected unfolded as planned. But over time, patterns emerge that reveal a kind of intelligence that does not operate according to instant satisfaction. It operates according to long-term alignment. And alignment often requires detours that only make sense in hindsight. There were versions of your life you tried to hold on to that would have limited your depth. There were paths you were disappointed to lose that would have narrowed your future. There were situations that ended not because you were unworthy, but because your trajectory was already being redirected towards something that required a different inner structure. And although you could not see it then, something within you was already adapting. Even pain has been part of that adaptation process. Not because pain is desirable, but because it forces honesty. It strips away illusion. It interrupts narratives that cannot hold truth for long. And in that interruption, something more real begins to form. And now, you may be noticing that your relationship with your own life is changing. Not in dramatic external ways, but internally. You are no longer able to fully ignore certain questions. You are no longer able to fully return to previous assumptions without hesitation. You are no longer able to treat your inner experience as something secondary to external demands. Something has shifted in priority. And that shift is irreversible in the way awareness always is once it crosses a certain threshold. You cannot unsee what you have begun to see. And that means your life from this point forward is not about returning to who you were, but about integrating what you are beginning to understand. This integration is not a task. It is a process of becoming more congruent with what is already emerging within you. And as this process continues, something very subtle begins to happen in how you relate to uncertainty itself. You stop interpreting it purely as threat. You begin to sense it as space, not empty space, but space that has not yet taken form. And within that space, possibility becomes more real than fear. You begin to feel that your life is not closing in on you, but opening in ways you did not previously allow yourself to consider. And in that opening, something quiet but profound begins to stabilize within you. A sense that you are not abandoned in your uncertainty. A sense that your life is not disconnected from meaning, even when meaning is not immediately visible. A sense that there is a continuity beneath all apparent fragmentation. And that continuity has been present all along, even when you could not feel it, even when you doubted it, even when you tried to reduce everything to randomness just to make it easier to carry. Now, something in you no longer fully believes in randomness as the final explanation for everything you have lived. Not because randomness has no place, but because it is no longer sufficient to describe the depth of your experience. There is more structure here than you once allowed yourself to consider. And that structure is not rigid, it is alive. It responds, it adapts, it moves with your awareness. And the more you become aware of it, the more your experience begins to reflect that awareness back to you. This is why even small shifts in perception can lead to large shifts in life direction over time. Because perception is not passive, it organizes experience. And now, your perception is changing at its root level, not through force, but through recognition. And recognition, once it begins, does not stop easily. It deepens, it expands, it reorients everything it touches. And you are in that process now. Not at the beginning anymore, but not yet at the full integration either. You are in the unfolding middle, where awareness is still becoming stable in its new form. And in that middle space, patience is not waiting for something to arrive. It is learning how to remain present while arrival is already in progress. And as you remain in that presence, something within you begins to feel less fragmented, less divided between what you feel and what you think you should feel, less pulled between past conditioning and present awareness, more capable of holding complexity without needing immediate resolution. And in that capacity, something very important begins to emerge. Peace is no longer something you chase. It becomes something you recognize as already present beneath disturbance. Not because disturbance disappears, but because it is no longer interpreted as total reality. And in that shift, life becomes less about escaping what you feel and more about understanding what your feelings are pointing toward. And what they are pointing toward is not confusion. It is coherence still forming, still revealing itself, still becoming visible through your willingness to stay with it rather than escape it. And so even now, as you continue forward, something in you is changing in a way that does not require your constant awareness to continue. A deeper reorganization is taking place. And it is not asking you to force it. It is asking you to allow it, to stop interrupting it with old interpretations too quickly, to let meaning arrive in its own timing, because what is forming within you is not just a new understanding of life. It is a new relationship with life itself. And that relationship, once fully established, changes everything without needing to announce itself. It simply becomes the way you are. And in that way of being, you will look back at this period not as confusion that needed to be escaped, but as the threshold where everything quietly began to change direction towards something more aligned than anything you previously knew how to imagine. And in that recognition, there is no urgency left. Only continuity, only awareness, only the quiet understanding that you were never outside of guidance. You were inside it all along, learning how to see it. And now, you are beginning to see, slowly, clearly, and in a way that cannot be fully reversed.